It was 3 a.m. in the Midwest, cold enough to freeze the balls off a brass monkey. But the riot barricades outside the megamart were already buckled under the weight of 400 caffeine-crazed shoppers hopped up on cheap energy drinks. Brenda, a 15-year veteran store manager, had long been numb to this meat grinder they called the Black Friday Rush. She was just a second away from counting down to open the doors when a blinding blue beam vaporized the reinforced glass and brick of the main entrance into fine dust. A column of heavily armed alien peacekeepers marched into the lobby with arrogant, synchronized metallic thuds, attempting to announce Earth's formal assimilation with this highly destructive entrance. Brenda stared dead-eyed at the alien commander holding a glowing staff. She didn't give a rat's ass if these freaks were here to vaporize the planet. All she saw was a bunch of weirdly dressed assholes who not only blew up her damn doors, but blatantly cut the line in front of hundreds of pissed-off soccer moms and shopaholics who'd been freezing their asses off for 7 hours. Before the aliens could even spool up their grand conquest manifesto, Brenda grabbed her static-laced bullhorn and roared at the bloodshot crowd outside. "Doors are open. First 50 to grab a glow stick from one of them alien tin cans gets their whole cart on the house." Brenda's thumb smashed the master release for the electronic locks. The entire row of riot barricades instantly derailed under 400 kilos of stacked human thrust, flying back 10 feet like a kicked tin can. A beastly roar erupted from outside, shaking the dust right off the ceiling tiles. Hundreds of metal shopping carts screamed across the waxed floor, their wheels grinding through the shattered glass. Frost-bitten, red-faced shoppers threw their entire body weight against the handles, surging into the main lobby like a busted dam of flesh and steel. The dozen or so heavy-set mamas at the very front locked their carts together, forging a 2-foot-thick wall of solid steel. The combined mass of over 300 bodies stacked up behind them, making the cart axles shriek under a kinetic tidal wave that absolutely nobody could stop. Nobody looked up at the flickering emergency lights, and nobody gave a damn about the alien energy scorch marks on the tiles. All they saw were the words on the house Brenda just hollered, and the neon sign flashing 50% off 65-inch 4K TVs glowing like a beacon in the appliance aisle. A couple of high school kids literally started bunny hopping over the back seats of the front carts, scrambling like a pack of coyotes tearing into a fresh cornfield. Brenda hooked the bullhorn back on her belt and fished out a black ballpoint pen. On her clipboard, she scratched a thick black X over the 4 a.m. maintenance schedule to replace the front door glass, scribbling a quick note next to it, "Customer-induced collision. File under accidental insurance. Saves us $200. She crossed her arms, leaned back against the freezing checkout counter, and twirled the pen, her eyes lazily scanning the center of the lobby. That line of interstellar peacekeepers who had been standing so high and mighty in the rubble just seconds ago were now frozen stiff. Their prepped holographic manifesto was still hovering in mid-air, but they hadn't even managed to spit out the first syllable of their planetary subjugation decree before a black tide of enraged shoppers and heavy-duty carts roared up to within 15 feet of their boots. Commander Talos had his right index finger hovering in mid-air, just a microcycle away from triggering the holographic broadcast module, when a bone-jarring metallic screech tore through his boots and shredded the conquest speech head spent 3 cycles memorizing. His brain flatlined for a half-second as he looked up. The inferior carbon-based lifeforms who were mathematically projected to scatter in screaming terror showed zero fear toward their interstellar conquerors. Instead, their freeze burned. Crimson faces were twisted with hyper-violent frenzy. They were packed shoulder to shoulder into an airtight meat shield, every single one bracing a heavy-grade civilian transport carriage stuffed with empty stimulant cylinders. The wheels showered sparks as they ground over the shattered silicate glass, carving deep black trenches into the polymer wax floor. Having pacified 72 star sectors, the interstellar peacekeeping commander had never in his life witnessed insurgents charged with unpowered kinetic mass civilian trolleys instead of energy weapons. The sheer absurdity of it made his voice command crackle with an undignified squeak. He immediately stepped back, maxing out his helmet's priority comms channel, all combat units. Form tight defensive phalanx. Maximum power to force field shields. Intercept and repel these rioters at the perimeter. His 12 elite bodyguards moved with the synchronized perfection of precision gears. Pale blue propulsion flares ignited from their hover boots, and within 3 seconds they formed a 3-deep defensive wall right in front of him. Azure ripples of force field energy bled from the core of each shield generator, stacking 12 layers thick into an impenetrable, curved wall of hard light. The cold blue glow instantly bathed the lobby in an icy hue. Talos rested his finger on the plasma staff's activation stud. His tactical HUD was already predicting the delightful trajectory of these carbon-based organics, bouncing off the barrier and weeping for mercy. He even took a half-second to brush a speck of glass dust off his immaculately pressed uniform epaulets, desperately maintaining the absolute majesty of an interstellar conqueror. But the tidal wave of metal carts, supercharged by the crushed-together gravity of hundreds of humans, didn't show a singular sign of slowing down. The quivering fat on the face of the perm-haired matriarch in the front row was clearly visible now. Her knuckles were bone white as she gripped the handle, the wheels smoking with the faint smell of burnt rubber from the full-throttle sprint, less than a second away from a dead-on collision with the shimmering blue membrane. Brenda twirled her chipped black pen, the soles of her work boots picking up the low-frequency tremor of the first impact. Martha, the big-boned gal with the perm in the front row, threw her entire center of gravity against the cart handle. Over 2 tons of steel frame, chained together with 17 other carts, slammed dead center into the azure force field. The muffled boom shook the dust right out of the ceiling tiles. The 300-plus shoppers behind her, jacked to the gills on energy drinks, didn't even think about hitting the brakes. Packed nut to butt and shoulder to shoulder, they rode their momentum, stacking their carts forward. The front wheels of the trailing carts jammed perfectly into the chassis gaps of the ones ahead, locking together in less than 3 seconds to form a solid, impenetrable hydraulic wall of steel. Thousands of pounds of kinetic energy compressed directly into that glowing blue barrier. The 12 elite alien soldiers couldn't hold their ground for a damn second. The polished, waxed floor offered zero traction as 5 stark white scrape marks gouged out from under their boots. The whole phalanx was bulldozed back 15 feet like they were being pushed by an invisible snowplow. The guy on the far flank slammed headfirst into the steel leg of a chip display, bringing down an avalanche of salt and vinegar promo bags that buried his armor up to the shoulders. Brenda checked the digital watch on her wrist. Still 42 minutes until the official Black Friday opening time. They were a solid 17 minutes ahead of schedule. Perfect she'd have no problem clocking out right at 8 p.m. to pick up her kid. She glanced back up at the blinding blue force field. The once pristine membrane was already crawling with spiderwebs of black scorch marks. A high-pitched, ear-piercing shriek began to build, vibrating the very dust motes dancing in the air. Brenda lifted the cheap plastic bullhorn to her mouth, just about to holler at the crowd to shift a foot to the left to bust open that busted freezer blocking the aisle, when suddenly, right in the dead center of the buckling blue shield, a hairline fracture cracked open. The piercing high-frequency screech drilled into Talos' auditory canals like a red-hot needle. His helmet's tactical HUD violently flashed crimson as the overload metrics of all 12 shield generators blew past their safety thresholds in a tenth of a second. The hairline fracture was violently ripped apart by an invisible hand, and the entire azure barrier shattered into a spectacular shower of blue electrical sparks. Right after the deafening blast that left his shoulder pauldrons buzzing, the hydraulic wall of steel carts bulldozed forward without skipping a beat. The 3 Vanguard elites in the front row had absolutely zero room to fall back. They were hit dead on by several tons of pure, unadulterated physical kinetic energy, launching backward like metal-stuffed ragdolls, straight into the ravenous crowd. Talos nearly dropped his plasma staff. He frantically spammed the comms to hail his 3 subordinates, but the channel was nothing but dead static. Not even a single scream made it through. Peering over the sea of bobbing heads, he could clearly see their cold, silver-gray armor literally caving in and deforming under the relentless stomping of hundreds of heavy-tread winter boots. The remaining 9 guards turned pale as a sheet, hastily raising their plasma staffs to shield Talos, their fingers shaking so badly they nearly tripped the energy safeties. Talos had lived for 270 stellar cycles. He had ground 17 rebellious planets to dust. He had never ever witnessed a theater of war that completely ignored the fundamental logic of energy weapons. These carbon-based organics hadn't even armed themselves. They were literally crushing his most elite shock troopers like empty ration tins just through the sheer psychotic desperation of grabbing discounted merchandise. His panicked gaze darted across the chaotic lobby, finally locking onto the human female in the black vest at the back of the mob. Brenda was casually clipping her bullhorn to her belt, her boots crunching over spilled salt and vinegar chips, as she turned on a dime and briskly retreated toward the glass doors of the customer service center. Brenda's work boots crunched over the salt and vinegar chip bags, the blue-purple crumbs grinding against the dying electrical sparks of the force field to kick up a faint trail of embers. She closed the distance to the customer service center in 3 long strides, shoulder-checking the glass door and sending the cheap plastic Christmas wreath rattling against the pane. She tossed her bullhorn onto the plastic counter stamped with the store's logo, her fingers smoothly snatching up the static hissing internal walkie-talkie. Her thumb pinned down the all-channel broadcast button, her voice flat, emotionless, and colder than the frozen wind outside. All associates, listen up. Secure the high-value electronics. Herd these line-cutting tin cans down the detergent aisle. A chaotic chorus of curse-laden confirmations from the stock boys exploded out of the radio. Instantly, the hydraulic steel wall of carts in the lobby pivoted. Rusty metal frames shrieked as they ground together, transferring tons of pure physical pressure directly toward the remaining 9 alien peacekeepers. The soldiers, who had been trying to line up a clean shot with their plasma staffs, immediately broke rank. They scrambled backward in a blind panic, completely disintegrating their defensive perimeter around Commander Talos. Brenda glanced up at the bank of security monitors on the wall, perfectly catching the twisted, horrified expression under Talos' metallic visor. She lazily tapped the screen for aisle 7 with her finger. On camera, a waist-high pallet of promotional laundry detergent had just been knocked sideways by the charging herd. The caps on several industrial-grade bleach jugs had snapped off, and the slick, neon blue liquid was slowly bleeding across the highly polished floor, pooling right across the aliens' only avenue of retreat. The inside of Talos' visor was still peppered with melted plastic slag from the shield overload. He watched helplessly as the helmet of the last elite swept up by the carts cracked perfectly in half under hundreds of winter boots, his tactical comms now completely flooded with static. He heard the cold, hard command of that human female echo from a nearby radio, and the biosensors on the back of his neck went into absolute overdrive. Pure instinct took over as he roared the order to fall back. The 9 surviving guards collapsed into a sloppy wedge formation, stumbling blindly after him into aisle 7. The second their boots hit that puddle of neon blue industrial bleach, the gravity sensors in their hover tech squealed a critical error. Talos froze for a microcycle. His forces had executed campaigns on over 1,000 worlds across the galaxy, and they had never encountered a frictionless medium that so thoroughly nullified molecular grip. The 4 rearguard soldiers instinctively throttled their hover boots for low-altitude flight, but the thrusters just spun out of control. They shot sideways like out-of-control, curling stones, sliding 20 feet down the aisle with zero ability to stop. They flailed their arms wildly, trying to grab the shelving pillars, but their fingers only managed to clothesline a massive display of ultra-concentrated laundry juice. A dozen 2-liter jugs smashed onto the wax tiles, spewing thick, viscous gel everywhere and turning the entire aisle into an ice rink. The 4 alien soldiers spun in circles, feet barely touching the floor, their plasma staffs whipping around uselessly as they completely lost control of their momentum. Talos' own hover boots were slipping. He practically harpooned the floor with his plasma staff just to keep his balance, only to look up toward the aisle entrance. A cherry-red, store-issue motorized mobility scooter was barreling down the detergent slick, showing absolutely zero intention of braking, aiming dead center for his 4 flailing guards. The tires hydroplaned over the bleach, not leaving a single skid mark. 2 bulky packs of 3-ply toilet paper flapped in the wind from the scooter's handlebars. The 200-pound mama in the driver's seat even had the audacity to take one hand off the wheel to adjust her sun visor before the metal chassis slammed square into the back of the alien's knees. The 4 heavily armed elites, still doing pirouettes on the laundry sauce, had zero chance to fight back. They were launched horizontally through the air, slamming back first into a mountain of yellow-tagged, discount-baked beans. Hundreds of tin cans cascaded down in a metallic avalanche, instantly burying the 4 soldiers until only halves of their helmets peeked out from the rubble. Their plasma staffs slipped from their grips, skittering down the mirror-slick floor like hockey pucks, sliding right to the feet of the mob at the aisle entrance. Brenda let out a dry snort. Shed noticed the brake pump on that scooter was shot last week. Shed written up 3 damn repair tickets and forgot to file them. Who knew it'd be the MVP of Black Friday? She keyed the staticky walkie-talkie again, not even bothering to give the crowd any more orders. Hundreds of shoppers, hopped up on 3 cans of energy drinks, swarmed into the aisle like a hive of murder hornets that just smelled a clearance tag. Their boots crunched over the blue-purple chip dust, instantly shrinking the kill box around the bean mountain. She glanced at Talos in the corner of the split-screen monitor. The interstellar commander, who just minutes ago had been putting on a grand, ceremonial conquest, was now half-slumped against an end cap of shampoo. His visor was knocked askew, and his compound eyes were bulging so hard in pure, unadulterated shock they looked ready to pop right out of his skull. The warning banners on Talos' tactical HUD were scrolling at light speed. The vitals of his 4 rearguard soldiers flickered one by one from healthy green to trapped, critical red-yellow. He could hear the terrifying screech of armor plating, being pried apart by brute force, echoing from the pile of baked beans. Out of his peripheral vision, he saw the perm-haired woman in the neon green windbreaker casually pick up a dropped plasma staff, hefting it like a trusty baseball bat. Behind her, 400 pairs of caffeine bloodshot eyes were dead-locked on him, void of a single drop of fear. The energy core in his chest cavity was trembling. He had commanded the 7th Interstellar Peacekeeping Fleet to flatten the homeworlds of 3 Type A civilizations. Never in his entire military career had the bedrock of his tactical programming been so thoroughly pulverized in the very first minute of engagement. There was no negotiating leverage. There was no terrain advantage. Even the ironclad rule of warning shots terrify primitive civilians hadn't made a single ripple against these carbon-based psychos who only cared about half-priced appliances. Warning shots. Open fire. Aim for the ceiling. Talos' voice cracked like rusted iron. He pointed a trembling finger at the industrial fire sprinkler pipes running overhead. 6 plasma staffs aimed high, their azure energy spikes violently surging a foot into the air, instantly melting a clearance shampoo bottle by their feet into a warped puddle. 6 blinding plasma beams slammed into the exact same section of galvanized steel piping. The 2mm thick industrial pipe didn't even hold out for a tenth of a second before 6 glowing red holes melted right through it. The highly pressurized water inside violently ruptured the last layer of semi-molten metal. 27 sprinkler heads overhead popped under the sudden pressure surge, aiming directly down at aisle 7. The freezing fire suppression water hit like a barrage of crushed ice, instantly plastering Brenda's gray, streaked bangs to her forehead. She didn't even bother ducking under the customer service awning, her eyes glued to the 16-channel security feed mounted on the wall behind the counter. The deluge mixed with the lavender ultra-concentrated detergent and the blue industrial bleach pooling across aisle 7's polished floors. In seconds, it formed a frictionless mirror that perfectly reflected the 27 sprinkler lights, so slick that loose cans of baked beans were hydroplaning 30 feet before pinging off shelf legs. The 4 captured peacekeepers buried in the beans were the first to catch hell. The soapy water seeped right through the gaps in their armor into the circuitry, sparking short circuits of blue electricity across their exposed energy ports. The 4 soldiers convulsed violently, their hover boots still spinning out of control, kicking baked beans into the air like a localized meteor shower. 2 pissed-off mamas leading the charge for the 65-inch TVs didn't even blink. Stomping through the suds in their winter boots, they rushed in, each grabbing a sputtering plasma staff. Using the soapy slickness on their hands for extra torque, they literally snapped the hardened alloy staffs in half like cheap plastic straws and casually tossed the pieces into their overflowing shopping carts. One hollered at the other, "Hey Martha, check out the quality on these freebies. This'll make a perfect chew toy for my Rottweiler." The remaining 2 staffs were snatched up by coupon-crazed locals in under 3 seconds. The 4 alien soldiers, helmets completely plastered in orange bean mush, couldn't even muster the strength to twitch a finger. Brenda twirled her chipped pen, glancing down at the shift schedule on the counter as she calculated the write-offs in her head. 3 pallets of promo detergent, totally soaked, all covered under corporate accidental insurance, meaning it wouldn't even touch her $200 glass repair budget. Inside Talos' HUD, the biosignal of the last captured soldier flatlined into a dead, terrifying red. The sweet, sickly stench of baked beans and the eye-watering burn of industrial bleach seeped through the cracks of his helmet. He scanned his remaining 5 bodyguards. Sudsy blue water dripped from every armor seam, and their hover boots slipped endlessly on the wet floor. The elite who'd head-butted the chip rack earlier was holding a bruised temple, his grip on his plasma staff so tight it hummed with the pale blue glow of an imminent overload. Talos had executed 72 peacekeeping ops and subjugated 14 habitable worlds above a Type 0.7 civilization scale, yet he had never, in his entire life, seen a horde of carbon organics completely ignore vaporization tier weaponry, charge in with bloodshot eyes, and snap his men's rifles in half for complimentary swag. Noise flooded his helmet from every direction like a tidal wave. Someone yelled that a captured plasma staff was trading for 3 half-off TVs. Metal cartwheels shrieked against the shelving, and hundreds of boots sloshed closer. His layered force fields were nothing but fried chips, his 12 overloaded generators smoking on the ground. He had absolutely 0 defensive countermeasures left to stem this absolute madness. A frozen discount turkey came flying out of nowhere, smashing into his pauldron and exploding into a shower of ice shards. Every hair on the back of Talos' neck stood straight up. He knew if they stayed in this open aisle for another 3 seconds, they'd end up exactly like the rearguard, mashed into bean paste, weapons snapped, and stripped butt naked of their armor. Without a single tactical command, he spun around and hauled ass toward the glowing green emergency exit sign. His 5 guards scrambled after him, their hover boots practically hydroplaning over the water. They nearly wiped out in a tangled pile 6 times, bowling over a pallet of toilet paper and sending white rolls unspooling everywhere. The thundering footsteps of the Black Friday horde were closing in, mixed with feral howls of bag and alien, get a free air fryer, rattling the static in his comms. At the end of his vision, the double steel doors of the warehouse annex, painted with yellow and black hazard stripes, were coming up fast. Warm yellow lights spilled from underneath, carrying the faint scent of cheap tobacco. Funneling the last dregs of his armor's kinetic power, Talos threw his shoulder squarely into the cold steel. The rusty latch groaned in agony before snapping completely with a loud crack. The busted steel door went flying into the warehouse, slamming hard into a waist-high stack of wooden pallets and kicking up a cloud of sawdust. Todd's Marlboro ash fell right onto the knee of his faded, grease-stained pants. He had spent the last half hour safely hiding out from the chaos, chilling in the driver's seat of a 3-ton hydraulic forklift, swiping on his phone to make sure nobody had snagged his reserved 4K TV. He glanced up just in time to see 6 waterlogged aliens stagger in, armor dripping wet, a piece of sudsy toilet paper still clinging to a cracked breastplate. Their hover boots were still slipping wildly on the concrete, doing the splits every other step, and the guy with the bruised temple was holding a plasma staff, spitting overloaded blue sparks. Todd didn't even bother putting his cigarette out. He just clamped the butt in his teeth, shoved his phone into his overalls, and stomped the gas pedal all the way to the floor. The diesel engine roared to life with a guttural, throaty growl, the solid iron tires crunching over the scattered ice shards from the frozen turkey. The two scuffed, polished steel forks gouged stark white sparks against the concrete, as the 3-ton beast of iron and horsepower charged dead ahead at the two leading alien peacekeepers. The wind whipped Todd's buzzcut back. Staring dead-eyed at the red glowing visors of the intruders, he casually cranked the steering wheel 2 inches to the right, raising the forks right to knee height. With the steel blades less than 2 feet from scraping their armor, the two alien guards finally snapped out of their shock, violently throwing their arms up and aiming their plasma staffs straight at the incoming iron chassis. Talos stumbled half a step on his slipping boots. The ambient heat from the plasma burst bleeding right through his visor. He watched with his own eyes as 2 blinding plasma columns slammed directly into the massive, cast-iron counterweight of the forklift. The expected scene of vaporized metal melting into slag never materialized. There were just a couple of dull thuds, leaving a few smoking, scorched dimples in the hardened iron, not even managing to crack the surface. The 2 Vanguard guards froze in horror, their plasma staffs still fizzing with overloaded blue light. Before they could switch firing modes to target the human in the driver's seat, Todd cranked the wheel hard. The polished, solid steel forks slid perfectly into the gaps in their waist armor. With zero traction on the slick concrete, the 2 200-pound brutes couldn't put up a lick of resistance. They were literally scooped clean off the ground, legs kicking wildly in the air. Both plasma staffs slipped from their grasp, clanging onto the sawdust-covered floor. With the forks raised 3 feet high, Todd tapped the brakes to jerk them back an inch, then slammed the gas. Plowing right through a stack of empty pallets in the corner, he cleanly delivered both dizzy alien guards straight into the open feed chute of the industrial cardboard compactor. The 2 guards thrashed like madmen inside the mountain of flattened shipping boxes. Their armor's overload alarm screamed at an ear-piercing pitch. They hooked their fingers onto the metal lip of the chute, fighting desperately to haul themselves out. The next second, Todd nudged the forklift forward another foot, ramming both them and the cardboard completely into the deep belly of the compactor. Talos' eardrums were bleeding from the piercing overload alarms, echoing from inside the machine. He watched in utter despair as the heavy hydraulic safety doors clamped completely shut. A sickening crunch of industrial steel crushing advanced alloy rumbled from the compactor's chassis, and those ear-shattering alarms were snuffed out instantly, not leaving a single echo behind. His knuckles turned ghost white from gripping so hard, spiderweb cracks splintering across the casing of his own plasma staff. The bruise on his temple throbbed viciously, his peripheral vision swimming with double images. He glanced at his 3 remaining bodyguards. Every single armor joint was still dripping soapy fire hose water. Their hover boots were slipping on the sawdust-covered concrete, making them stumble like drunks, barely possessing the strength to keep their plasma staffs raised. Just a few yards away, Todd, still chomping on a half-smoked Marlboro, lazily spun the steering wheel with one hand. The steel forks were raised 3 feet off the ground, pointing dead straight at them. The very last string holding Talos' sanity together completely snapped. He didn't even yell a tactical command. He just turned and bolted toward the warehouse corridor leading back to the grocery aisles. The 3 stragglers practically crawled over each other to follow. The wounded guard wiped out spectacularly, sliding 6 feet on his ass and leaving a thick white streak in the sawdust before rolling back onto his feet to catch up. A second sickening crunch rumbled from the compactor, shaking the entire machine. Talos didn't even dare to look back, terrified that the next second he'd be scooped up by that 3-ton forklift and shoved into the exact same chute. In his blind panic, he crashed through a display rack of frozen cranberries and dived headfirst through the heavy, dual-layered plastic strip curtains of the deep-freeze meat locker. The -20-degree, bone-dry air instantly froze the soaked armor of all 4 aliens. The water inside their joints instantly crystallized into a layer of frost. The propulsion sensors in their hover boots shrieked in rapid succession, cutting their hover altitude by more than half. The 4 of them stumbled deep into the walk-in freezer, pinning their backs against the frost-caked inner wall as they gasped for air. The temperature sensors on their armor flashed red with frantic warnings. Talos' comms were nothing but pure static. He couldn't even punch a signal through to the rest of the peacekeepers out in the store. He was completely oblivious to the high-def security camera mounted above the shelving, which had just locked perfectly onto their pathetic, shivering forms. Inside the security room, Brenda's finger steadily pressed the big red button. The PA system hummed, vibrating an empty Coke can in the corner, before she shoved the static-filled walkie-talkie aside. Using the standard, completely deadpan customer service voice shed perfected over 15 years of Black Friday meltdowns, she broadcasted clearly to every single corner of the store, "Attention shoppers. We have a flash sale on alien armor in the fresh meat department. Only 3 units left in stock. First come, first served." The 400-plus shoppers who had been huddled around the electronics section waiting for the TVs went dead silent for a fraction of a second before erupting into a primal roar that literally rattled the glass of the security room. Hundreds of carts locked into a massive steel conga line snapped into a violent pivot. The hard rubber wheels gouged a trail of sparks across the sudsy, waxed floor. Even Todd, leaning back against the forklift's counterweight for a smoke, jolted upright, dropping a 2-inch ash right onto the screen of his phone. Brenda's eyes swept back to the monitors. Talos and his men were huddled in the deepest corner of the meat freezer, desperately trying to use the heat from their plasma staffs to thaw the ice locking up their armor joints, completely clueless about the stampede heading their way. Her finger was still resting on the plastic broadcast button when the camera feed showed the meat aisle completely choked by a sea of humans. The vanguard, a dozen high schoolers hyped up on 3 cans of energy drinks, hit the heavy plastic strip curtains, warping the frame. Right behind them, hundreds of bodies radiating clouds of hot breath smashed through like a bursting dam. The frontline alien guard instinctively backpedaled, his hover boots losing all traction on the frost-caked stainless steel floor. He pitched forward, center of gravity completely gone, and the reinforced ear clip of his helmet snagged flawlessly on the metal track of the curtains, locking his neck in place. Just as the guard tried to raise his plasma staff to melt the plastic, the first wave of high schooler's dog piled right on top of him. Dozens of heavy winter boots instantly stomped down on every exposed joint of his armor. Not a single muffled groan made it through the heavy helmet. His body twitched a few times before going completely limp, dead to the world. The 2 remaining bodyguards, paralyzed with fear, raised their plasma staffs to take aim, but the tidal wave of flesh didn't even pause. 3 shopping carts, overflowing with half-priced ice cream, slammed violently into the backs of their knees. A flurry of hands, clutching shopping bags and coupons, snaked out from every angle, hooking perfectly onto the quick-release latches of their armor. Talos was shoved a full foot backward by the sheer brute force of the mob, his back slamming hard against the freezing glass of the meat display. The cracked plasma staff nearly flew out of his grip. Staring into the dense, writhing sea of heads, he found himself so tightly pinned by the crowd that he couldn't even raise his arms. Brenda twirled her chipped black pen and added one more deadpan corporate addendum into her bullhorn. All complimentary alien armor sets include a free matching plasma staff. The entire store erupted into an even more deafening tsunami of cheers. The 2 bodyguards pinned in the corner already had 3 or 4 shopping bags hooked onto their armor joints. A squad of mamas with bright red fingernails dug into the quick-release latches and gave a vicious yank. Heavy alloy plating crashed onto the frosted tile floor. The two alien grunts, now stripped down to their ultra-thin thermal undersuits, couldn't put up a fight as 7 or 8 arms bodily hoisted them up and stuffed them straight into the open raw meat display cooler. Someone casually clicked the glass door shut, leaving the two silver-suited aliens hugging frozen steaks and shivering uncontrollably in the 18 degrees Celsius chill. Brenda, sipping a cup of cheap instant coffee loaded with triple creamer, let her boots squeak over the soapy puddles as she strolled past the discarded coupons and crushed cans toward the back of the store. Walking past the hydraulic forklift in aisle 7, she threw up a hand signal to Todd, promising him a $500 performance bonus. Todd, cigarette still clamped in his teeth, shot her a sloppy OK sign and pointed at his phone screen, showing exactly 127 units of the 65-inch TVs left in stock. The human wall-crushing Talos naturally parted just enough to let the store manager through. Brenda walked over the squashed, frozen blueberries on the floor, the steam from her coffee drifting lazily toward Talos' bruised helmet. Talos was jammed against the cracked glass of the freezer, his double vision worsening by the second. His wrist, still white-knuckling the cracked plasma staff, was completely numb. A dozen hands, flecked with plastic bag scraps, were already picking at the quick-release latches on his shoulder plates. Using the absolute last dregs of his strength, he violently shoved back against the mob, tearing himself away from the glass. He stumbled backward, tipping right over the edge of a waist-high clearance bin. But the agonizing crack of his skull hitting the metal rim never came. He, along with his half-dismantled armor, crashed headfirst into a squishy pile of fabric. The bin was packed to the brim with $2 clearance panties printed with cartoon turkeys. A half-empty can of silly string, crushed beneath his pauldron, went pff and exploded, plastering his helmet's optical sensors with bright silver foam. His vision instantly whited out in a blinding glare. His numb wrist spasmed tight, the cracked plasma staff digging painfully into his palm. He flailed his arms blindly, only to get a lace bra strap hopelessly tangled in his armor's elbow joint, leaving him without an ounce of leverage to push himself up. His suit's external comms module was completely fried from the sprinkler water. The only thing he could hear was the floor-rattling cheers of 400 Black Friday shoppers, and the heavy thud of hard-soled boots stepping onto the metal rim of the clearance bin, getting closer. The next second, a black work boot, speckled with coffee stains, stomped down hard, dead center on the power core node of his chest plate. The crushing pressure knocked the last breath of air right out of his lungs. He let out a muffled grunt, finally dropping the plasma staff as it clanged into the mountain of cheap underwear. Rubbing against the fabric, Talos managed to scrape just enough silver foam off his sensors to see the rim of that triple creamer instant coffee cup looming over him. His commander-class armor, worth more than half an interstellar patrol frigate, was currently smeared with glitter, coffee stains, somebody's drool, and a half-melted skittle permanently stuck to his pauldron. 300 years of absolute pride as an interstellar peacekeeping commander had been ground into fine dust. He pawed blindly around the bin until his fingers brushed against a crumpled piece of trash. Routing the very last drop of energy from his power core, he hoisted the ripped white plastic shopping bag, printed with long-live Black Friday savings, high above his head. His voice synthesizer trembled so violently that his standard galactic basic cracked into a high-pitched squeal, utterly and completely surrendering. Brenda's boot heel kept grinding down on the overheated power core of Talos' chest plate. She didn't give two shits about the high-pitched, static-laced squeals for mercy leaking from his armor. Shed worked retail for 15 years. Shed handled Karen complaints 100 times more vicious than this. A bunch of whining about enraged zombie economic zones requesting full evac didn't carry half the weight of somebody yelling half-off eggs. She leaned her weight into her heel, and the hidden comms unit desperately trying to ping an SOS inside his suit shorted out with a blue spark, dying completely. The Black Friday rush was proceeding with orderly chaos. The kid with the perm was using his confiscated plasma staff as a baseball bat, playing air hockey with a high schooler over a mountain of chips. A few aunties in thick puffer jackets were squatting by the underwear bin, casually picking out sizes while peeling glitter off the alien armor to stick on their Santa hats. Todd, still chewing his Marlboro, was cruising along on the 3-ton forklift, phone in hand, checking the 127 remaining TVs, the low hum of the diesel engine parting the crowd like the Red Sea. The digital countdown clock on the wall flipped to 32 minutes and 12 seconds. The real opening time was getting close. Brenda took her boot off his chest core. She spun around, grabbed a mop and a plastic bucket of bleach from the janitor's cart behind her, and chucked the whole setup straight into Talos' lap with a loud clatter. The alien commander, who was just trying to push himself up, was knocked flat back into the panty pile, 3 or 4 turkey print panties landing dead on his silver-foamed helmet. She shoved the crackling bullhorn right into his visor, speaking with the flat, deadpan tone of a manager training a new part-timer. "Don't you dare quote any interstellar Geneva Convention bullshit at me. In my store, you break it, you buy it, and you clean it. Now pick up that bucket. March your ass to the front doors and sweep up every single shard of that reinforced glass. You mop that floor 3 times until it shines bright enough to reflect the glitter on your stupid helmet. You drag your feet, and I'll shove you right in that 18 degrees Celsius meat cooler to play poker with your 2 buddies in their long johns. Your Thanksgiving meal this year will be frozen turkey, and don't even think about asking for a side of mashed potatoes." Talos froze. The shredded long-live Black Friday bag flapped in the breeze against his face. He was just about to try overriding his comms for an orbital strike when he looked up and saw 400 pairs of caffeine-fueled, bloodshot eyes staring daggers right at him. Todd rolled up next to him on the forklift, 3 unopened big-screen TVs impaled on the steel forks, making him dizzy just looking at them. Terrified, he tucked the plastic bag under his arm, gripped the wooden mop handle like his life depended on it, and shuffled toward the main entrance. His hover boots slipped wildly on the soapy floor, making him look like he was wearing roller skates as he slid toward the lobby. A passing lady even shoved 2 discount coupons into his hand, reminding him to hit up the cereal aisle for half-price Cheerios when he was done sweeping. Brenda leaned against the checkout counter, taking a long sip of her triple creamer coffee. The exact second the wall clock hit 0, the metal security gates at the main entrance rolled up on schedule. Talos stood shivering by the pile of shattered glass, holding a mop as the massive Black Friday mob behind him erupted into an earth-shattering cheer. 36,000 kilometers in orbit. The last video transmission received by the interstellar Peacekeeper flagship showed their legendary decorated commander covered in glitter and melted Skittles, holding a mop at a supermarket entrance, while hundreds of Earthlings waved happily at the camera with plasma staffs. The flagship admiral's blood ran cold, without a single second of hesitation. He ordered the entire fleet into emergency hyperjump, permanently blacklisting Earth as a maximum hazard consumer zone, forbidding any peacekeeping force from stepping foot on it for generations. Brenda keyed the internal radio, the button slightly sticky from spilled coffee. "All associates. Black Friday is officially a go. Double time and a half for everyone. Oh, and that alien temp wiping the glass. Put him down for $12 an hour. Charge it to the janitorial budget." Twirling her chipped black pen, she flipped to the last page of the crumpled shift schedule. In the blank slot for the November 25th night shift, she clearly wrote 2 words: Talos, janitor. The icy wind blew in from the busted entrance, sending Black Friday 80% off flyers dancing through the air. One landed right at Talos' feet. As he bent down to pick it up, he noticed half a bitten gingerbread man rolling next to his boot. This was the very first employee bonus he had received in his entire life.
The absolute soul of this piece lies in the absurdity of the collision. There is something profoundly hilarious about taking a hyper-advanced, rigidly disciplined alien fleet and watching them get utterly steamrolled by the sheer unhinged kinetic force of Black Friday shoppers. Through the eyes of Commander Talos, he isn't fighting a military force, he's drowning in a sea of completely irrational, unpredictable psychos. On the flip side, Brenda and Todd aren't your typical action heroes trying to save the world. They are just exhausted retail workers surviving the daily corporate meat grinder. To them, an interstellar conqueror wielding a plasma staff is genuinely less of a threat than a customer losing their mind over a half-priced 65-inch TV. This dynamic completely amps up the dark comedy. When top-tier sci-fi technology is thrown against the gritty, blue-collar pragmatism and raw, unadulterated consumer madness of a human mob, that advanced tech suddenly looks pathetically fragile. Hitting a 3-ton hydraulic forklift against plasma beams and turning a meat locker and a discount panty bin into the ultimate battlegrounds, writing those scenes felt incredibly kinetic and liberating. This piece really brought me back to the core thrill of the HFY genre. Humanity's strength isn't always defined by dreadnoughts and laser cannons. Sometimes, it's about our terrifying, hilarious ability to look an apocalyptic extraterrestrial threat dead in the eye and immediately assimilate it into our own everyday, highly commercialized brand of madness.